Greetings, and welcome back to my channel. Get ready, because today we're unearthing a tale that will test your nerves. If you crave adrenaline and the shadows that hide the unknown, then hit that like button and subscribe to join us for more terrifying stories. Alright, buckle up, because this one's a real head-scratcher. You know those stories that just stick with you? The ones that make you glance over your shoulder when you're home alone at night? Yeah, this is one of those. It's about my cat, Cosmo. Now, Cosmo wasn't just any cat. He was a fixture in our family, a furry, four-legged enigma who'd been around since I was practically in diapers. Cosmo had this nightly ritual. See, every single night, without fail, he'd be banished to the basement. It wasn't some cruel punishment or anything. My parents, bless their hearts, were just particular. They were obsessed with keeping their bedroom pristine, a cat hair-free zone, and Cosmo, being the magnificent shedding machine that he was, posed a significant threat to their meticulously made bed. Plus, he was an outdoor cat, a real adventurer. If, by some chance, we forgot to escort him to his subterranean suite, he'd make sure we paid for it. 3 a.m. wake-up calls, complete with ear-splitting yowls demanding his release into the wild, were not uncommon. But the basement? That was Cosmo's kingdom. It was huge, the largest room in the whole house. Actually, think unfinished, concrete floors, exposed pipes snaking across the ceiling, the works. But for Cosmo, it was paradise. He'd strut down there like he owned the place, surveying his domain before settling down for the night on some forgotten piece of furniture. We always figured he liked the space, the freedom to roam and be, well, Cosmo. Then, about 2 weeks ago, things started to change. Subtly at first, almost imperceptibly, but definitely different. It started with the landing. You know, that little platform at the top of the basement stairs, right behind the door? That was our usual Cosmo drop-off point. We'd gently place him there, close the door, and within minutes, we'd hear him padding down the stairs, ready to claim his basement throne. One night, I went through the motions as usual, placed Cosmo on the landing, soft as you please, and quietly shut the basement door. I headed to the kitchen, grabbing a glass to fill with water, when I heard it. A plaintive meow, echoing from behind the basement door. Now, that was weird. Cosmo was usually halfway down the stairs by now, probably sniffing out a rogue dust bunny or something. Curiosity piqued. I finished filling my glass and wandered over to the basement door. Maybe someone had forgotten to fill his food dish? I opened the door and bam! Cosmo shot out like a furry little cannonball, bolting into the living room as if he were being chased by a phantom. I blinked, confused. Checked his dish in the basement. Completely full. Double weird. Shrugging, I scooped him up, carried him back to the landing, and repeated the process. Closed the door. This time, I lingered in the kitchen, listening. Sure enough, within minutes, the meowing started again. Persistent, almost frantic. I opened the door again. Same scene. Cosmo, perched at the top of the stairs, refusing to descend, looking utterly bewildered. The next 2 nights were carbon copies of the first. Landing placement, door closing, meowing, Cosmo refusing to go downstairs. It was like he developed a sudden aversion to his beloved basement. A nagging worry started to creep into my mind. Was he getting old? Was something wrong? It was a thought I didn't want to entertain. Not yet. It was too sad. Guilt gnawed at me, but I did what I always did when faced with something I didn't want to deal with. I ignored it, just kept putting him on the landing, closing the door, and tuning out the increasingly desperate meows, telling myself he'd go downstairs eventually. Cats are stubborn creatures, right? He was probably just being dramatic. Then came the day he refused to even enter the house. Cosmo was an outdoor cat, yes, but he always had his routines. He'd patrol the yard, chase squirrels, nap in sunbeams, but when he wanted in, he made it known. He'd park himself on the front steps or by the back door, a furry sentinel, patiently waiting for one of us to spot him through the glass and grant him entry. But this time, nothing. He was just gone. 4 hours. I started to get genuinely worried. Where was he? Had something happened? Finally, late in the afternoon, I spotted him, curled up in a tight little ball on the doormat, looking miserable. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by concern. He looked unwell. I want to let him in, but he didn't even acknowledge me. Usually, he'd perk up, maybe give a little meow of greeting, rub against my legs. This time, he just stayed curled up, eyes half closed. I knelt down, gently stroked his fur. He flinched slightly, but didn't move. Something was definitely wrong. I went back inside, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. A few hours later, I walked past the door again, just checking on him. Still there. Still curled up on the doormat. It was getting late. The air was starting to cool down. I couldn't leave him out there all night. Not like this. Sighing, I went outside, scooped him up in my arms. He was surprisingly light, almost frail. He didn't protest, just nestled into my arms, a low rumble of a purr vibrating in his chest. He wasn't happy about being carried inside. I could tell, but he didn't fight it. He just seemed resigned. I knew he didn't want to go downstairs, not anymore. So, I did something I'd never done before. I let him sleep in my room, made a little nest for him on a soft blanket in the corner. He settled down almost immediately, curling up and finally drifting off to sleep. It wasn't a big deal, just one night, right? And he seemed so much calmer, so much more at ease. Of course, that solution wasn't going to fly for long. The next few days, my dad started complaining, loudly. "Who keeps leaving the basement door open?" he'd bellow, his voice echoing through the house. "It's letting all the cool air escape downstairs. Air conditioning isn't free, you know?" He loved reminding us of that particular financial reality, especially during the sweltering summer months. I automatically assumed it was my sister. She was notorious for leaving doors ajar, drawers slightly open, lights blazing in empty rooms. She was just oblivious. I didn't really pay my dad's complaints much attention. I was too preoccupied with Cosmo, too relieved that he seemed to have mellowed out, content to sleep in my room, safe and sound. Then, one night, I woke up, just randomly. Middle of the night, pitch black, the kind of deep sleep you're instantly yanked out of. Groggy, half awake, I glanced around my room, trying to get my bearings. And that's when I saw it. Something weird. Over by the door, in the doorway itself, there was a silhouette, standing perfectly still, just there. It was dark, but I could make out the shape, the outline of a person. The faint glow of the lamp we always left on in the den cast just enough light to define the figure against the darker hallway. My first thought, naturally, was my sister, probably sleepwalking again, or maybe she needed something, I don't know. "Hey," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "Is that you?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there. Then, slowly, silently, retreated, melted back into the darkness of the hallway. No words, no sound, just gone. I was too tired, too disoriented to process it properly. Shrugged it off as a weird dream. Or maybe my sister really was sleepwalking. Rolled over and went back to sleep. But a seed of unease had been planted, a tiny prickle of something wrong. A couple of days later, we discovered the source of Cosmo's basement aversion. Fleas. Not just a few fleas. An infestation. The basement was crawling with them. Disgusting, hopping, biting little monsters everywhere. It was like a scene from a horror movie, but with tiny, blood-sucking villains. Suddenly, everything clicked. Cosmo's refusal to go downstairs, his strange behavior, his general malaise. It all made sense. He was trying to tell us something, in his own cat way, and we, in our human obliviousness, had completely missed the memo. We assumed the fleas were the reason, the only reason, Cosmo had been acting so strangely. It was logical, plausible, but still, it was strange how they'd appeared out of nowhere. We'd never had a flea problem before, not ever. And Cosmo, bless his flea-resistant fur, always wore a flea collar. My dad, predictably, launched into full-on blame mode. He rounded on my mom, accusing her of neglecting Cosmo's flea collar. "You didn't change it, did you?" he demanded, his voice laced with exasperation. My mom, bless her patient soul, swore up and down that she had. She was meticulous about those things, always on top of pet care. But my dad, once he got an idea in his head, was like a dog with a bone. He went into overdrive, tackling the flea infestation with military precision. He declared war on the basement, armed with vacuums, sprays, and industrial-strength cleaning solutions. He tore through every corner, every nook and cranny, determined to obliterate every last flea. We vacuumed the carpets. Yes, even the basement had ancient, musty carpets, sprayed every surface with flea-killing chemicals, and washed everything down with potent, flea-annihilating solutions. "Stay out of the basement for the next few days," he decreed, his voice firm. "Let the chemicals do their work. Any stragglers will die off without a host." It seemed like a good plan, a foolproof plan, and for a while, it seemed to work. The basement was off-limits, shrouded in chemical fumes, a no-go zone. I figured that would be the end of it. Fleas vanquished, Cosmo back to his basement kingdom, life back to normal. But then, a few nights later, another strange thing happened. I was lying in bed, reading, when I noticed it. Light, seeping in under my door, flickering, on and off, like someone was playing with the hallway light switch. My heart skipped a beat. That silhouette in the doorway flashed through my mind, unbidden. I told myself it was probably just my dad, getting up to use the bathroom or something. But the flickering continued, rhythmic, insistent, going on for longer than seemed normal. It was starting to freak me out, a low-level hum of anxiety vibrating through my veins. I couldn't bring myself to check it out. Too scared, too unnerved. I lay there, heart pounding against my ribs, staring at the sliver of light under the door, willing it to stop, hoping it would stop. Eventually, blessedly, it did. The flickering ceased, the light vanished, leaving only the familiar darkness of my room. I forced myself to fall asleep after that, but I'd never felt more uneasy, more watched in my own house. A few more days passed, blessedly uneventful. My dad, in his infinite flea-fighting wisdom, declared the basement probably clear. Great news, because I'd been missing my basement sanctuary, my video game haven. As soon as I got home from school, I practically sprinted downstairs, eager to resume my digital adventures. But as soon as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I knew. Something was wrong. Again, there were still fleas down there. Not as many as before, maybe, but definitely still present. A decent amount of them, hopping around, oblivious to my dad's chemical warfare. It didn't make any sense. After all that cleaning, all those sprays, they should have been long gone. Frustration bubbling up, I went back upstairs, grabbed my phone, and called my dad at work. "Dad, there are still fleas in the basement," I said, my voice tight with disbelief. "I thought you said." He cut me off, his voice impatient. "Just give it time," he insisted. "I told you, any fleas left will die soon enough. Just stay out of there for a few more days." He brushed me off, dismissing my concerns as childish impatience. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else going on, something more than just stubborn fleas. It wasn't normal for them to keep thriving like that, not after everything we'd done. Something felt off, deeply, unsettlingly off. So, the next day after school, fueled by a growing sense of unease and a healthy dose of teenage curiosity, I decided to investigate. Properly investigate. I wasn't just going to blindly accept my dad's dismissive assurances. I was going to find out what was really going on in that basement. I went down to the back of the basement, to the far corner, to the storage room. That's where we kept all the forgotten relics of our family history. Old boxes overflowing with dusty photos, discarded tools rusting in forgotten corners, moth-eaten furniture shrouded in white sheets. It was a room of shadows and secrets, a place we rarely ventured into. I figured if there was anything unusual going on, it would be in there. Maybe a rodent had gotten in, died somewhere, attracting the fleas? It was a long shot, but it was the only logical explanation I could come up with. I pushed open the creaking storage room door, and instantly, I knew I was right, but not in the way I expected. The smell hit me first, a thick, cloying, rotten stench that hung heavy in the air, clinging to the back of my throat, making my eyes water. It was the smell of decay, of something dead. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a dead rodent. This was something else. Something bigger. Something worse. I followed the smell, my nose wrinkling in disgust, deeper into the storage room. It led me to the far end, to a dark, shadowy corner. That's where the unfinished crawl space was. A gaping black hole in the wall, leading to the plumbing for the whole house. It was pitch black back there, an abyss of darkness. And the smell was overpowering now, emanating from the crawl space like a physical presence. It was almost unbearable. I didn't want to go in there. Not at all. It was too dark, too ominous. I turned to leave, to grab a flashlight, to maybe, just maybe, abandon this whole ill-advised investigation. And that's when I heard it. Breathing. Faint at first, barely perceptible, but undeniably there. Steady, rhythmic breathing, like someone or something was hiding in the darkness. My blood ran cold. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. A pit of icy dread formed in my stomach, expanding, consuming me. The breathing got louder, closer, as if whoever, or whatever it was moving towards me, emerging from the crawl space. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. Before I could react, before I could even scream, I saw it. A figure, lunging out of the darkness, from the end of the crawl space, moving fast, impossibly fast. A hand reached out, pale and skeletal, reaching for me, grasping, desperate. I jumped back, recoiling in horror, stumbling backwards, tripping over my own feet. I didn't stay to get a better look. Didn't want to get a better look. I ran upstairs as fast as my legs could carry me, adrenaline surging through my veins, fear propelling me forward. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, the sound echoing through the silent house, a sharp, decisive bang that punctuated my terror. Locked it, bolted it, and then, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial, I called the police. They arrived quickly, sirens wailing, lights flashing, a whirlwind of officialdom descending on our quiet suburban street. They searched the house, every room, every corner, basement to attic. But there was no sign of anyone. No intruder, no lurking figure, no anything. Just emptiness. They did find something in the crawl space, though. Empty chip bags, crumpled food wrappers, stashed away in the darkness. Signs of habitation. But that was it. Whoever had been down there, whoever had lunged at me from the darkness, had vanished. Escaped through the storm door at the back of the basement, into the anonymity of the night. The officer, a kindly, middle-aged woman with a reassuringly calm demeanor, said it was probably just a homeless person. Someone who'd snuck in looking for shelter, a warm place to sleep, a refuge from the streets. It was a plausible explanation, a comforting explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. Something darker. How long had they been living there? Hidden in the shadows of our basement, breathing in the darkness, watching us, unseen, unheard? And how much had they seen? How much had they heard? My parents were twice as shocked as I was. Horrified, bewildered, shaken to their core. We kept the basement door locked after that, bolted shut, a permanent barrier against the unknown lurking beneath our feet. And Cosmo? Well, Cosmo still won't go anywhere near that door. He gives it a wide berth, his fur bristling, his eyes wide and wary, a silent testament to the terrors he sensed long before we did. I don't remember every detail of this story, not anymore. I was only around 7 years old when it happened, a wide-eyed, impressionable kid. But my parents have filled in some of the gaps over the years, piecing together the fragmented memories, trying to make sense of the senseless. And there are still bits and pieces that stick out in my memory, vivid and unsettling, like shards of broken glass. So, here it goes. Another story, another glimpse into the strange and unsettling corners of my childhood. This one's about Halloween and a haunted house and a mask that changed everything. I was an only child. Yeah, it kind of sucked sometimes, growing up without siblings, without built-in playmates. But there were pros too, I guess. My parents, for one, were incredibly involved in my life. They really went out of their way to make sure I was happy, thriving, engaged. Looking back now, I appreciate that more than words can say. Every year, around Halloween, my parents would transform our basement into a haunted house. It wasn't anything fancy, mind you, just some old decorations salvaged from years past, fake spiderwebs stretched across dusty furniture, strobe lights flickering erratically, and a whole lot of enthusiastic amateur theatrics. But it was for a good cause. That was the whole point. You had to donate canned food to get in. My parents would collect everything we gathered and donate it to the local food bank. A gesture of community spirit and Halloween fun rolled into one. They even made flyers, printed them up at the local copy shop, and passed them around my school and a couple of other elementary schools nearby. The vast majority of people who came were parents of kids in my school, familiar faces, friendly neighbors. But there were always a handful of parents and kids that we didn't know, strangers drawn in by the flyers, by word of mouth, by the promise of a spooky good time for a good cause. My parents actually welcomed that. The more strangers there were, the more food they'd be able to collect, the greater the likelihood that the haunted house would be a resounding success. We lived in a pretty big brick house in Taunton, Pennsylvania. A lot of the houses in our neighborhood were fully brick, a historical quirk of the town. Something to do with the local clay deposits, I think. Whatever the reason, it meant that most of them were really old too. And in Taunton, it was kind of frowned upon to do any major remodeling, to mess with the historical character of the houses. Our house, in particular, was the kind of place that already had a bit of an eerie vibe to it, even without the Halloween decorations. Especially at night. Old creaky floors that groaned underfoot, dimly lit hallways that stretched into shadow, a general sense of age and history, and maybe just a touch of something else. Every year, my cousins Jeff, Rick, Chaz, and Eric would come down to help my parents set up and manage the haunted house. They were older than me, cool older cousins who knew how to make things scary. Usually, they'd dress up in cheap, store-bought costumes, plastic masks and rubber fangs, and hide around the basement, lurking in the shadows, ready to jump out and scare my friends. But that year, they decided to go all out. They wanted to up the scare factor, to make this year's haunted house the scariest one yet. They'd pooled their money and bought matching anonymous masks. You know the ones. Those kind of creepy white masks, stark and featureless, with the blank, unsettling expressions. They were genuinely unnerving, even without the haunted house context. The haunted house was a big hit that year, bigger than ever before. As usual, we had a good crowd going by early evening, kids and parents streaming in, clutching cans of food, eager for a scare. But my parents told me later that there had been a strange man who showed up before things really got started. He wasn't with any kids, which was odd, since the haunted house was mostly geared towards families. He was alone, slightly disheveled, a little off-putting. He said his wife was planning to bring their daughter later on, but he wanted to drop off some food cans early to beat the rush, he explained. My parents didn't recognize him, had never seen him before in their lives, but they figured it wasn't a big deal. Charity was charity, no matter where it came from. They thanked him, took the cans, and stood there awkwardly for a moment, unsure what to do next. He seemed to linger, to hesitate, before finally taking the hint and leaving. As the night went on, and more people showed up, the basement got pretty chaotic. Kids were running around, screaming and laughing. Parents were trying to keep up. My cousins were lurking in the shadows, masked and menacing. It was a controlled frenzy of Halloween fun. I remember trying to keep up with my friends, running through the maze of decorations, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and manufactured fear. At one point, one of my friends, Sarah, came up to me, her face streaked with tears, her voice trembling. She was crying. "Someone in an anonymous mask scared me," she sobbed, her little body shaking. "Really scared me." I tried to calm her down, patting her shoulder awkwardly, telling her it was just one of my cousins, just part of the haunted house fun. But then she said something that made my stomach drop, that turned the playful fear of Halloween into something cold and real. "He grabbed my wrist," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror, "and tried to pull me into a closet." A closet? There weren't any closets in the basement. Not really. Just a small storage room, filled with boxes and junk. But still, The way she said it, the look on her face. It wasn't just childish drama. She was genuinely scared. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe she was just being dramatic, exaggerating the scare for attention. But something in her voice, in her eyes, told me she was telling the truth. Something had happened down there, something that had genuinely frightened her. I went and found my parents, pulled them aside, and told them what Sarah had said. They listened intently, their faces growing serious, the festive Halloween atmosphere suddenly dissipating. They took it seriously, immediately. No dismissing it as childish fancy. They went down to the basement to check things out, to investigate. They gathered my cousins, Jeff, Rick, and Chaz, still lurking in their designated scare zones, still masked and menacing. They asked them if they had seen anything strange, if they had noticed anyone acting inappropriately. Jeff, Rick, and Chaz, still in character, still adopting their spooky personas, swore they hadn't seen anything like that. Each one of them, in turn, vehemently denied grabbing any kids, denied trying to pull anyone into a closet. But then, my parents noticed something else. Something missing. Eric. Where was Eric? He wasn't at his post, wasn't lurking in his assigned shadow, wasn't anywhere to be seen. A ripple of panic went through the group. Where had he gone? Just then, as if on cue, Eric came running down the basement stairs, breathless and flustered. He said he'd taken a break to use the bathroom upstairs, a quick trip, he'd thought. And when he came back down, his anonymous mask was gone. Vanished. He figured one of the other guys had taken it, a prank, a Halloween joke. He'd assumed they were messing with him. But that set off alarm bells for my parents. Loud, insistent alarm bells. A missing mask, a scared child, a strange man earlier in the evening. It was all starting to add up to something deeply unsettling. They didn't hesitate. They immediately shut down the haunted house. Just like that, Halloween fun abruptly over. They made everyone leave, politely but firmly ushering the remaining families out of the basement, explaining some vague, technical difficulties, apologizing for the sudden closure. Then, they called the police. Again. The police came, sirens wailing once more, lights flashing. Another wave of officialdom descending on our Halloween festivities. They searched the house, top to bottom, basement to attic again. But of course, nothing turned up. No sign of a missing mask, no trace of a strange man, no evidence of anything untoward. That night, after the police had left, after the house had settled back into an uneasy silence, I was still a little shaken up. But I figured it was all over. A false alarm, a misunderstanding, a childish overreaction. I fell asleep easily enough, exhaustion finally overcoming my lingering unease. But then, I woke up, again, to a sound, a tapping sound, soft, almost delicate, but definitely noticeable. Like someone was repeatedly knocking on my bedroom window. Tap, 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 a slow, deliberate rhythm in the darkness. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped me. I was too scared to get up, too terrified to move. I just lay there, rigid with fear, pulling the covers up over my chin, burrowing deeper into the perceived safety of my blankets, hoping, praying, I could just fall back asleep, that it was all just a bad dream. After a few minutes, agonizingly long minutes, the knocking stopped. Silence descended again, heavy and oppressive. And, eventually, mercifully, I managed to drift back to sleep, a fitful, uneasy slumber haunted by shadows and whispers. But a few hours later, I was woken up again, this time by a different sound, a scratching noise, louder, more urgent than the knocking had been, like someone was clawing at the window frame, scraping against the glass, desperate to get in. Terror, raw and visceral, surged through me. I was paralyzed with fear, frozen in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. But then, something inside me snapped. A primal instinct, a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to confront whatever was out there. I threw the covers off, adrenaline coursing through my veins, fear momentarily overridden by a surge of reckless courage. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. I yanked open the curtains, my breath catching in my throat, a silent scream building in my lungs, and my heart nearly stopped. There, staring back at me, inches from the glass, eyes wide and unblinking, was a person. In an anonymous mask, the same blank, white mask that had haunted my Halloween night, now pressed against my bedroom window, a silent, terrifying specter in the darkness. I screamed, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that tore through the silence of the night. My parents, jolted awake by my terrified scream, rushed into the room, their faces etched with alarm. I pointed frantically at the window, my hand trembling, my voice choked with terror. There, at the window. But by the time they looked, by the time their eyes focused on the window pane, the person was gone, vanished, melted back into the shadows of the yard, leaving only the lingering echo of my scream and the cold, hard reality of what I had just seen. We called the police. Once again, they came, sirens and lights, the familiar routine of fear and officialdom. They searched the yard, the surrounding area, the whole neighborhood, it felt like. But they didn't find anyone. No sign of forced entry, no footprints in the dew-kissed grass, nothing. The property was clear, they declared, their voices tinged with a mixture of reassurance and skepticism. A few months passed. Things settled down, slowly, tentatively. The haunted house became just a memory, a faded photograph in the album of our family history. My parents, gradually, started to ease up on their extra security measures, the heightened vigilance slowly fading back into the background of our daily lives. Then, one day, I came home from school. Just a normal Tuesday afternoon, homework and after-school snacks on my mind. I walked into my bedroom, tossed my backpack on the floor, and stopped dead in my tracks. Lying on my bed, right in the center of my neatly made comforter, was an anonymous mask. White, blank, unsettling. It wasn't just any mask. It looked exactly like the ones my cousins had worn that night, the masks that had become synonymous with fear and Halloween terror. But the thing that really freaked me out, the thing that sent a fresh wave of icy dread washing over me, was the writing. Scrawled across the forehead of the mask, in jagged black Sharpie, was my name. My name, staring back at me from the blank, white expanse of the mask. How the hell had that guy even known my name? How had he gotten into my room? How had he left that mask, that chilling, personalized message on my bed? The questions swirled in my mind, a vortex of fear and confusion. We called the police. Again. But there wasn't much they could do. Not really. No evidence of forced entry, no witnesses, no anything. Just a mask, a creepy mask with my name scrawled on it. They filed a report, another file in the growing folder of unexplained incidents at our address. My parents, understandably, went into security overdrive. Again, they added more security cameras, strategically placed around the perimeter of the house, recording every shadow, every movement. They made absolutely sure all the doors and windows were locked tight, every single night. They really went over the top this time, installing a full-blown alarm system, putting sensors on every window, including the upstairs ones, turning our house into a veritable fortress. After that, nothing else happened. At least, not that we could prove. The next few months were fine, outwardly normal. But I swore, sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and still, I kept hearing things outside my bedroom window. Tapping, scratching, whispering sounds in the darkness. You name it. It was probably nothing, just my overactive imagination, fueled by fear and paranoia. But it got to the point where I was scared to sleep in my own bed. The sanctuary of my room had been violated, tainted by fear, haunted by the image of that mask at my window, by the chilling message scrawled across its forehead. I've since grown up, moved out of that house, started my own life, miles away from Taunton, Pennsylvania, and the brick house that held so many unsettling memories. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and still, I still wonder. I still wonder if there was more to the story, more to the mystery behind what happened to me, to us, all those years ago. If there was something darker, something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly normal suburban life. And then there's the story about the Mexican joint, the one that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I recently got a job at this Mexican restaurant in a neighboring town. The area was a bit sketchy, let's just say. Not exactly the safest part of town, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. I was young, I was broke, and I was desperate for money. So, sketchy neighborhood or not, I needed the job. Plus, I figured working nights wouldn't be so bad. I'd have most of the day to myself, free to do whatever I wanted. Sleep in, hang out with friends, play video games, whatever. The restaurant itself, El Burrito Loco, was decent enough. Nothing fancy, but clean, busy, and the food was actually pretty good. But the manager, Carlos was, well, shady. That's the only word for it. He always scheduled me for the worst hours. The late-night closing shifts kept me late, often past closing time, and never seemed particularly concerned about following labor laws or any rules, really. He was the type of guy who made you feel like you couldn't trust him, like he was always hiding something, always cutting corners. But like I said, I didn't have much of a choice. I needed the job. So, I put up with Carlos's shady management style, his late-night shifts, his general air of untrustworthiness. One night, while closing up, I started hearing these weird noises. I was mopping the tiled floor in the kitchen, the clatter of chairs stacked on tables echoing in the otherwise quiet restaurant, when I first heard it. As I was mopping, pushing the heavy, wet mop across the sticky tiles, I picked up on these two muffled sounds, soft thuds and a kind of scraping sound. They were coming from below the floor. From the basement, I assumed. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible over the clatter of the mop and the hum of the refrigerators. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The thudding and scraping would alternate, rhythmic and unsettling. I was positive that there were two distinct sounds I was hearing, not just one. I stopped mopping, stood perfectly still, listening intently. The noises continued, faint but persistent, for maybe a minute, maybe longer, before stopping completely. It startled me, definitely. Made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, but I brushed it off as something mundane. Maybe an animal outside, digging around near the foundation? Or just the pipes settling, the old building groaning in the quiet of the night? Something small, something explainable. But then it kept happening, night after night. The noise would start up when the place got quiet, just as I was finishing up my cleaning, just as I was about to lock up and go home. Those strange, low thuds, and that unsettling scraping sound, always coming from below the floor, from the direction of the basement. After a few nights of this, my curiosity and my unease finally outweighed my desire to ignore it. I told Carlos about it, mentioned the weird noises I was hearing, the thuds and scraping from below the kitchen floor. He shrugged it off immediately, dismissive and uninterested. "It's nothing," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just the building settling. Old building, you know?" He told me to stop worrying, to focus on my job, to not let my imagination run away with me. Then, he went as far as to say something that made my suspicion spike. "The restaurant doesn't even have a basement," he said, his voice flat, his eyes avoiding mine. "No basement, just a crawl space. Sealed off years ago." That's when I got a little suspicious. A little? Okay, a lot suspicious. I knew he was lying. I had literally seen the window wells around the back of the building, those sunken concrete rectangles that let light and air into basements. Window wells meant basement. Basement meant something. I wanted to call him out on it, to point out the obvious window wells, to challenge his blatant lie. But I held my tongue. Something in his demeanor, in his dismissive tone, in his shifty eyes, told me to tread carefully. I figured I'd give it another day, another night of closing shifts. Maybe the noises would stop on their own. Maybe it really was just the building settling, my imagination running wild. Hopeful thinking, maybe. Of course, the noises continued. Night after night, the same unsettling thuds and scraping, the same persistent feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I complained to him again, more insistent this time. "Carlos, I'm telling you, there's something going on in the basement," I said, my voice firmer now, less hesitant. "And the place must have a basement, because there are literally windows below the ground outside." That's when he gave me the strange look, a look that was a mixture of annoyance, impatience, and something else, something darker, something unreadable. He insisted again, his voice sharper this time, that there was no basement. No basement, he repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. The previous owners sealed it years ago. No one can get in or out. Then, he told me, in a firm, almost threatening voice, just focus on your job. Stop poking around. It's nothing for you to worry about. The way he said it, so dismissive, so firm, so final, gave me a bad feeling. A really bad feeling. But I didn't want to lose the job. I needed the money. So, I dropped it. Let it go. Or at least, I tried to. I figured maybe it was just some animal, a raccoon or something, that had somehow gotten into the sealed-off crawl space. It was still weird that Carlos was so insistent on not checking it out, on not taking me seriously. But I tried to push it to the back of my mind, to focus on my job, to ignore the unsettling noises from below. For the next few days, the noises persisted. Every night, the same routine. Closing shift, cleaning up, then those strange, low thuds, and that occasional scraping, like something or someone was moving around down there, in the darkness beneath the restaurant. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that something was being hidden, something sinister, but I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Then, one night, after closing up, after locking the doors, after turning off the lights, curiosity, that insidious, ever-present human trait, got the better of me. I couldn't resist the urge to go check out those windows again. Just a quick peek, I told myself, just to satisfy my curiosity, to put my mind at ease. Or maybe, to confirm my growing unease. I walked around to the back of the building, the cool night air sending a shiver down my spine, the shadows stretching long and distorted in the dim streetlights. I fully admit that my hands were shaking as I walked around the building, my heart pounding in my chest, a drumbeat of apprehension. I knew nothing good was going to come from poking around, from indulging my morbid curiosity. But I couldn't stop myself. I crouched down, near one of the window wells, peering through the grimy glass, trying to get a good look inside. It was pitch black inside, completely dark. I couldn't see anything, not even with the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the window well. Just darkness. Impenetrable, absolute darkness. I pulled out my phone, switched on the flashlight, and aimed the beam into the window well, trying to penetrate the inky blackness. Still nothing. Just concrete walls, dirt, and darkness. Just as I was about to give up, to admit defeat, to retreat back to my car and drive away, a light flickered on inside the basement. Just for a second. A brief, fleeting flash of weak, yellowish light. Then it snapped off, plunging the basement back into darkness before I could see anything clearly. I froze, my heart racing, adrenaline surging through my veins. Unsure of what I had just seen, unsure if I had actually seen anything at all, or if it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination. But I knew, deep down, that I had seen something. Something real. Something human. I rushed back to my car, my legs moving faster than my brain could process, fear propelling me forward, a primal instinct to flee, to escape. Too freaked out to go back inside, too terrified to linger for even a second longer. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the metal, but I managed to get in, to slam the door shut, to lock it, to start the engine, to speed off into the night, leaving El Burrito Loco and its hidden basement and its unsettling secrets far behind. But I didn't tell Carlos. Not yet. Something about the whole situation, about his dismissiveness, about his lies, about that fleeting flash of light in the darkness, made me feel like it was better to keep quiet, to keep my suspicions to myself, to observe, to gather information, to wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for, exactly, but I knew, instinctively, that telling Carlos what I had seen would be unwise. I was not prepared for what was about to happen, though, not even close. The next time I closed, the next late-night shift, I couldn't resist the urge. The morbid curiosity, the nagging unease, the terrifying fascination, it was too strong to ignore. I had to go back to those windows. I had to see what was down there. I had to know. I fully admit that my hands were shaking, trembling uncontrollably, as I walked around the building again, the familiar shadows stretching long and menacing in the dim light. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat of dread, a warning siren blaring in my chest. I knew nothing good was going to come from poking around, from indulging this dangerous curiosity. But I couldn't stop myself. I crouched down again, near the same window well, peering through the grimy glass, my breath held captive in my lungs. This time, I leaned in closer, pressing my face against the cold glass, trying to get a better look, straining my eyes in the darkness. And that's when I saw it, pressed up against the glass, inches from my face, filling the small window pane, was a face. A human face. A man. But not just any man. He looked deranged. Completely, utterly deranged. His hair was wild, matted and tangled, hanging down in greasy clumps around his face. His face was filthy, smeared with dirt and grime, like he hadn't bathed in weeks, maybe months. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, giving him a gaunt, skeletal appearance. And his eyes were the worst part. Yellow, a sickly, unnatural yellow, wide and unblinking, staring right at me through the glass, burning into my soul. They were wild, vacant, devoid of any recognizable human emotion, except maybe hunger. A primal, terrifying hunger. He bashed his head against the window, a sickening thud against the glass, making me jump back in terror. And then he gave me this smile. A demented, grotesque smile that stretched his thin lips back from his yellowed teeth. A chilling, inhuman grin that sent a wave of pure, unadulterated terror crashing through me. I screamed. A raw, animalistic scream of pure, unreasoning fear, ripped from my throat, echoing in the stillness of the night. I stumbled back, scrambling backwards, tripping over my own feet, losing my balance, falling to the ground in a heap of terror and disbelief. I ran from the window, ran from the building, ran from the restaurant, ran from the face at the window, ran from the yellow eyes and the demented smile. I ran to my car, without looking back, without thinking, just running, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. My hands shook so violently I could barely fumble with my keys, my fingers clumsy and uncooperative. But I managed to unlock the door, to throw myself inside, to slam the door shut, to lock it, to start the engine, to speed off into the night, leaving El Burrito Loco and its basement horrors far behind. The next day, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The fear, the terror, the sheer, unadulterated horror of what I had seen. It was too much to contain. I went straight to Carlos, confronted him, told him everything. About the noises, about the windows, about the face, about the yellow eyes, about the demented smile. To my surprise, he didn't even try to deny it. No more dismissive shrugs, no more lies about sealed-off crawl spaces. Instead, he sat me down, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. And he actually told me the truth, or at least, what he claimed was the truth. He admitted that the person I had seen, the man in the basement, was actually his brother, his younger brother, Miguel. He said Miguel was mentally ill, seriously ill, dangerous even, and Carlos had been hiding him down there, in the basement of El Burrito Loco, to keep him out of trouble, to protect him, and maybe, to protect everyone else from him. He said the basement had been sealed off to the public years ago, officially closed for safety reasons. But Carlos, being Carlos, had found a way to let his brother live down there, in secret, away from prying eyes, away from the judgment of the world. He'd been bringing him food, supplies, keeping him hidden, keeping him contained. He urged me not to say anything, to keep his secret, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything. He said he'd appreciate it if I forgot this whole thing ever happened. Just erase it from my memory. Act like it never existed. I didn't know what to say. I was stunned, speechless, reeling from the revelation. I wanted to quit right then and there, to walk out, to never set foot in El Burrito Loco again. But I couldn't. I was so strapped for cash, so desperately in need of the money, that the idea of looking for another job, of starting over, didn't feel like a real option. Not yet. So, I stuck around, against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to run, to escape, to get as far away from that place as possible. I stayed. I convinced myself it would be fine, that I could handle it, as long as I stayed away from the basement, as long as I avoided those windows, as long as I pretended I didn't know what was lurking beneath the floorboards. I tried to keep my head down, to avoid Carlos, to just do my job, to clock in, clock out, and go home. But the whole thing left me on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumpy at every shadow, every unexpected noise. The restaurant, once just a job, had become a place of fear, a source of constant, low-level anxiety. A few weeks later, something happened that made me regret staying, that made me realize I had made a terrible, potentially life-threatening mistake. It was late, another closing shift, another night of cleaning up, of locking up, of trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that I was not alone in that building. As I walked to my car, parked in the dimly lit parking lot behind the restaurant, I noticed something, or someone, lurking in the tree line, at the edge of the parking lot, where the shadows were deepest, where the darkness was most complete. It was just a figure, a dark shape against the darker trees, barely visible in the gloom. But I knew, in my gut, in the deepest, most primal part of my being, that it was a person. And I had a feeling, a chilling, sickening feeling, that I knew who it was. My heart started racing, adrenaline flooding my veins, fear gripping me in its icy claws. But I pretended not to notice. Pretended I didn't see the figure lurking in the shadows. Pretended everything was normal. I kept walking, my pace deliberately slow, trying to stay calm, trying not to betray my fear. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, barely audible over the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. But then louder, closer, more distinct. Footsteps behind me, following me. I glanced over my shoulder, just a quick, furtive glance, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped animal. And there he was, the same man from the basement window, Miguel, Carlos's brother. He was hobbling strangely towards me, his movements jerky and uneven, but clearly moving as quickly as he could, his eyes fixed on me, his face contorted in a terrifying grimace. Panic surged through me, overwhelming, debilitating. I scrambled for my keys, my fingers fumbling, clumsy with fear. I managed to unlock the door, to throw myself inside, to slam it shut. Just as he reached the door, just as his outstretched hand brushed against the cold metal of the car door, he slammed his face against the window, his features distorted, grotesque, smeared with dirt and sweat, his yellow eyes burning into me, inches from my face. He started pounding on the glass, his fists hammering against the window pane, a frantic, desperate assault. I screamed, a choked, terrified cry, but I couldn't think straight, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. All I knew was I had to get out of there. Now, I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the tires screeching in protest, the car lurching forward, throwing me back against the seat. I sped off, tires spitting gravel, leaving El Burrito Loco and Miguel and Carlos and all the horrors of that place behind me, swallowed up by the darkness of the night. I'm not sure how I made it home that night without crashing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, my vision blurred with tears of terror, my body trembling uncontrollably. I've never been more scared in my entire life. I still thank God, every single day, that he had some kind of limp, some kind of physical impediment that slowed him down. Otherwise, he would have definitely caught me. Definitely. That was my last night working at El Burrito Loco. My very last night. I called the police from the safety of my apartment, my voice still trembling, my body still shaking. I told them everything. About the noises, about the basement, about Carlos, about Miguel, about the face at the window, about the chase in the parking lot. But I never went back. Never went back to El Burrito Loco. Never went back to that sketchy neighborhood. Never went back to face Carlos or Miguel or the horrors they had unleashed. I didn't want to know what happened next. Whether they found Miguel, whether Carlos got in trouble for what he'd done, for hiding his mentally ill brother in the basement of a restaurant, for endangering his employees, for everything. I just couldn't be involved anymore. I just needed to escape. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that Carlos might come looking for me one day, that he might track me down, seeking revenge for my betrayal, for calling the police, for disrupting his carefully constructed secret world. I don't know if he'd go to great lengths to do something like that, if he's that kind of person, that kind of dangerous. But it's a thought that sits in the back of my head, a persistent, nagging unease that refuses to go away. I never found out what happened to the restaurant, to Carlos, to his brother Miguel. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Maybe, someday, years from now, when enough time has passed, when the fear has faded, when the memory has become less vivid, maybe I'll take a drive by that restaurant sometime in the future, just to see if it's still there, just to satisfy my curiosity one last time. But for now, I want to stay as far away from that place and those people as possible, to keep the darkness of El Burrito Loco firmly locked away in the shadows of my past.